All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Sports to Suits Live, where weekly, as your host, Amanda Banks, I have the opportunity to highlight former athletes that have not only crushed it in their sport, but are also crushing it in business. And this week is absolutely no different. I'm super excited to introduce Charles Fernandez to you guys. But before we jump into the episode, please drop us a comment. Let us know that you're tuning in, where you're tuning in from. It's always super exciting to see where people are listening in from. And then I want to give a special moment to today's episode because a good friend of mine, Lauren Lowry, released a very special recording on her platform called Amstigator. It's a podcast recording. It was a conversation that we shared that shares a little bit of a deeper background on what Sports to Suits is. So for anybody that's a constant listener of the show that wants to know a little bit more about the backstory, please head over and tune into that. I'd be honored if you check it out and learn a little bit more about my story, as well as why we're doing Sports to Suits. So we already have some people popping in here. We've got Jason from Tulsa popping in. Thank you, Jason, for joining. Jason and Patrick always submit the best questions, so it'll be exciting to see what they come up with today. But without further ado, we have a super accomplished athlete as well as business person that's joining us to share a little bit about his story. So Charles, thank you so much for joining in today.
Amanda, it's great to be here and share just a little bit of my life and pretty much my trajectory with your followers and your show. It's honestly great to have really come about our conversations and really interact in the short time that we've had, and then coming to this and embracing this opportunity and just being able to learn just not from my story or your story, but also from all around, the people who are involved in this live. So thank you all for watching today.
Well, and so I'm going to learn a little bit about Charles, and Charles is going to learn a little bit about me on this conversation as well. We've had the opportunity to chat and get to know each other just a little bit, but we're going to dive super deep into this conversation, and I have got to know. So you have such a background, but before we get into all of the sports talk and then all of the business talk, like share a little bit with the audience, a little bit about like your background and where you come from, and maybe a little bit of like even how you got into sports.
Absolutely. So I'm Charles Fernandez. I'm a two-time Olympic athlete, and I've represented the Guatemala Olympic Committee for the past two Olympic Games in Rio and in Tokyo. So I just got off the Olympic Games last year. I've lived in Guatemala pretty much my whole life. I was born in Dayton, Ohio, but I moved to Guatemala when I was 6 years old as a missionary kid. Lived in the mountains doing social work with my parents' nonprofit there, primarily serving the Mayan people. But from there, I guess with life and purpose and dreams and goals and gifts, was I able to realize a little bit that I had a natural talent for sports. I loved being active. I loved running. I loved playing. I mean, I spent most of my childhood running in the mountains, playing with kids from other villages. So, I mean, my background was a very raw, unique background when it came to my upbringing. Little did I know that would have a massive effect on the purpose that I've carried out for these past 15 years of my life as being an Olympic and professional athlete. The sport that I do is modern pentathlon. It's a five sport discipline where we do running, swimming, shooting, fencing, and equestrian show jumping. So yes, it's a lot, but I guess, I was able to embrace it. I was able to lean in on it when it comes to taking the task and the challenge to master five sports at an Olympic level. And just to get a little bit of background to that, my dad was one of the first athletes in Guatemala to start this sport at an older age. He was 26, 27 when he started the sport. I'm currently 26. But little did we know that, I guess, a dream that he might have had to represent Guatemala at an international level would be carried down a generation into me, and me having the blessing and the honor to be able to represent a country that I love so much. And so that's pretty much a little bit of my background, where I come from, and now here in this situation where I don't know what the future holds. My future could hold, might hold a massive transition from being a professional athlete into the business realm of things. But what I've always looked towards to is the fact that I've embraced every opportunity and every chance that I've gotten to expand myself, not in sports, but educationally, business-wise, and on pretty much the social side of things. And so obviously this is a prime example. Our conversation today is a prime example of me embracing different opportunities, of me being able to learn, expand my outreach, expand my social network, and try to empower others with my story and everything that I do.
So let's take it back to the childhood, because not a lot of other kiddos go or experience this. So like, what were lessons that you learned in being and doing social work as a young kid and watching your entire family just be part of this social mission and cause?
Absolutely. I would say that the biggest thing that I've learned when it comes to working in social work and working with people who live in poverty is the fact that it instilled in me a greater purpose than me just living for myself. It instilled qualities and character of servitude that helped me become a person that has always been driven by helping others. And so when I embraced that as a little kid, I grew up that way. I grew up always wanting to help, always wanting to be involved. Like I said, at a very young age, I was involved in building churches, building homes, building education facilities all around Guatemala. And being able just to be exposed to that allowed me to have a massive work ethic towards what I felt most moved towards to. And so that later translated into sports. That purpose was carried from serving others into doing something with a purpose. And my purpose was to create a platform in order to bring light, in order to bring a greater awareness of what's really going on around us, and using that platform to be a voice for those people who might not have the opportunity to be heard or to be seen. And so with that greater purpose being driven behind what I did, it was an extra boost into, okay, I'm doing this for somebody. I'm doing this for who I grew up with, for who I served, and being able to show people a little bit of hope in the fact that my life has been a life that's never been centered around sports. It was something that I never, ever thought I would have ever embraced. I mean, going to the Olympic Games was something that I would have never thought in my wildest dreams that, could happen. But from one day to another, my dad is just like, Charles, you do realize you have the potential to become an Olympic athlete, but that's a decision that you have to take. I can't take that for you. And so when I looked at it, I was just like, you know what, you're right. Like, I do have a chance. What am I going to do with that? And so then that's where you conceptualize the fact that, okay, there are talents, there are gifts, there are purpose, bring that together and see what you can do. And obviously with the process of mastery, with the process of embracing concepts, techniques, and workflow, was I able to take all that stuff and translate it into what my career has been pretty much up until this point.
So let's talk about the modern pentathlon. So you got into this sport of choice, right? And was that because of your dad? Like, how did you actually get into this sport? Because it is not a common sport that, like, as a kid, you're like, hey, I'm going to go. Most kids are like, I'm going to play basketball, or I'm going to play football, or I'm going to go do gymnastics. But like, it's the modern pentathlon. So like, how did this even come about? Did it start with the modern pentathlon, or did it start with other sports? And was it through the lens of like you watching your dad experience this that you were like, hey, I think I could do that too? Or like, how did you even get into that?
Absolutely. So I've always been a kid who's been surrounded by sports in the way that my parents always took me to soccer. They always took me to basketball, especially when we were in the United States. I was always active in these summer camps. And so I had a lot of fun doing that, as most kids do at a very young age. Now, when we moved to Guatemala, I mean, yeah, everything translated into just soccer. But it's interesting because at a very young age, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, that I was in the mountains. I mean, my playground was running up and down hills all day long. And so at an altitude level. And so, you don't realize that the factors in the environment and the atmosphere around you have the potential to impact you at a greater scale. And that's that's in everything that we do. And so, little did I know that those activities, that involvement was helping me create a stamina that I didn't know I needed until, consciously chasing sports. And so living in the mountains obviously can only, go for so long, just because I need to receive a proper education. We were homeschooled back then, but really didn't learn too much. But because it's super remote. But little by little, I would go into track, I would go into soccer, I'd go into volleyball. And it wasn't until track and running that I realized that, no, I had something greater in me that was translating into being the best at what I was doing in that current moment, especially my middle school years. After middle school, I did triathlon for a little bit, so bumped one sport into 3. Did not like 3, so that's why I chose 5.
So why didn't you like 3? Like, what about the 3 bothered you? And before you answer that, I do want to give a couple of shout outs. So we've got Patrick tuning in. So, hey, Patrick, good to see you. And then we've got Al tuning in. So how are you doing today, Al? We've got Jason popping in a couple of questions that we'll pull up here shortly. But okay, so you're sitting here, you're processing, and you're like, I don't like 3. So I think most people would be like, okay, let's drop it back down to 1. But you're like, let's go to 5 or 6 or however many, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, I'm going to do all of these different things. So why?
Yeah. So in referencing what my dad used to do, he used sports to get out of poverty. He used sports to get out of the streets. He grew up in a very very poor household when it comes to living conditions. And with that being said, he didn't have the best atmosphere to develop. Sports was his way out of it. And so he used to be a runner. He used to be a basketball player. He used to be a handball player. He turned into eventually being a coach for a private club of running. The athletes that he used to coach were athletes who were influenced by the European culture. Their families were European and whatnot. Modern pentathlon is a very European sport. And so they said, we want to bring modern pentathlon to Guatemala. Would you like to try it? So like I said, my dad used to do modern pentathlon, did it for a couple years, but left it, came to the United States, met my mom. And so there's that. Years later, Guatemala is a pretty small country. And so when somebody recognized him, it was one of his former teammates who said, Carlos, look, we're doing these master competitions. So why not come back to the Federation, do a couple competitions with us, get reunited with your former teammates, and just enjoy it. And so my dad did. He said, sure, let's do it. Took me along. And at that time I was doing triathlon, and I was okay at it. I just didn't enjoy it. Coach came up to me and said, hey, would you like to try modern pentathlon? Like, how old are you? What are your talents? What are your gifts? Would you like to? And I said, yeah, sure. Like, let's give it a try. And I guess little by little, I just noticed that I had a facility in order to be able to embrace 5 sports really, really fast. And that allowed me to realize, okay, I actually really, really like this. I don't get bored of doing just one sport. I don't get bored of doing 3 sports. I think 5 sports is enough for me to be occupied. And so, yeah, I mean, yeah, it was a decision that I did not know that, I did not know what I was getting myself into until you could say, I looked back one day, I was like, oh no, like, you're too deep into this. Now it's time to finish what you started, type deal. And that's exactly
Let's talk about that, because I would, and I was a high level athlete, but I was not an Olympic athlete. And so, when you commit to training for the Olympics, like, you're committing, like, it's not just you want to be a high level athlete, or you want to win the Olympics. Like, and so to me, it seems like there's like a mindset transition that you have to go to, as well as a physical transition as far as training and regiment and all of those things. Like, talk a little bit about that process. Like, did you have to make a mindset shift to get to where you were going? And what did that look like?
Absolutely. I remember the moment where my dad sat me down. I was 16 years old. We were sitting at this restaurant, still remember the restaurant to this day, the table that we sat at. I remember he looked at me, he said, Charles, if you want to do this, this is a decision that you need to take. No one else can take this decision for you except for yourself. But once you take that decision, you stick to it, you go through it, you make sure that you live up to your word. And like I said, I did think about it maybe for a second or two. I definitely thought about it, but I knew I was passionate about it. And I think that's super important to take into consideration when you are looking at your dreams, you're looking at your goals, you're looking at something that you want to invest your time, your life, everything around you into accomplishing this one thing. And that's the purpose behind why you do what you do. And so for me, I realized that I did have a passion. I did have a purpose for what I was doing. And so at 16 years old, I said, let's do it. Now, 16 years old and on, let's just say it wasn't easy. I mean, I had to.
But you were all in. Like,
I had to sacrifice.
You were not living like a normal kid childhood. Like, you were all in 110%. There were no ifs, ands, or buts. You were committed at that point.
No, and my parents knew that. My dad knew that. He knew the fact that I committed to something and he was going to hold me accountable to it. That's why it's important to have the right people to hold you accountable, the right people for you to know that they're going to be there with you and they're going to be encouraging you through the good and through the bad, even if you don't want to. I think it's super important to have those people around you because you can't do this alone. This is not when you're going towards the Olympics, even though it's a one-man sport and it all comes down to yourself at the moment of competing, everything behind you, your support system has a massive influence. And so, yes, my dad held me accountable to my decision. He held me accountable to my word. And sometimes that didn't look pretty and it put a lot of strain in our relationship for many, many years. But to this day, all those sacrifices, all that we went through in order to make it was enough for me to say, okay, I have been able to fulfill my dream. I made it. But here's the thing. Your real journey, your real challenges start not once you make it, but what you do to repeat it or what you do to do it again.
Yeah, because you're not just a one-time Olympic medalist. You have done this twice.
Exactly.
So like I want to know as well, because this very much translates into entrepreneurship as well. I mean, when you jump into entrepreneurship, in my mind, you have to be 100% committed and you have to have the right people around you, and it makes all of the difference. So there's like direct translation there. But from the first Olympics that you were at versus the second Olympics, like how hard was it? Because you reached the pinnacle, like you were top of the top, like, but yet you went back again and did it again.
Absolutely.
So how hard was it? Like how difficult was it this time around to do that?
Absolutely. So first steps into doing it once is really the patience in the process. It's your resiliency, it's your dedication, it's your discipline that's fueled with purpose. And it's about being patient in that season, being patient in that structure, in that process. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that it's a constant discipline at going at it over and over again till you reach the art of mastery. The art of mastery is when you become a master at something, and it's because you've internalized its process, its execution, or you've learned to respect what needs to be done in order to achieve the intended goal. And so when you have that in mind, there needs to be a conscious framework into what you're putting in and what you're taking out. And that conscious framework is what's going to allow you to build that map, build that structure in order for you to look back and say, okay, this and this and this is what I did right. Now, what do we do in order to execute that process? I talk a little bit about flawless execution. Flawless execution is a concept that was brought to by James Murphy, and he interprets it as the ability in order to look at failures and to look at perfection as something that is not necessarily perfection is not attainable. Right? I mean, you can't attain perfection, but what you can attain is the fact that it's a constant repetition of you going after your goals, you constantly looking back at yourself, feeding back information to execute something close to perfection. And so I think it's really important to take a look at the structure and what you need to accomplish in order to do it twice. And when you're doing it twice, it's not against anybody else but yourself. And so you have to be brutally honest with yourself when you're approaching these concepts, when you're approaching these methods, because at the end of the day, the bar that you need to reach is a bar that you set for yourself. And that was the biggest thing for me, was that going into the sport, simply, there was no bar. No one ever set the bar high. No one ever really took time to put importance to perfection, for perfecting or mastering the art of pentathlon nationally. I was the first person to really dive deep and lean into that. And so when I did it once, everybody was like, okay, congratulations, Charles. Since you're going to go second time around, we expect you to win gold again. We expect.
So was the expectation for you to go again? Like
100%. I mean, and even to the things that sustained me financially. I mean, everything that had to do with my sponsorships, everything that had to do with my salary had to do with the fact that, okay, since you did gold once, if you don't do gold again, we're cutting your funding. We're cutting your salary by, 30, 40% because you're not good enough anymore, especially in a sport that you have 5 variables. I mean, it was a weird approach the way they took a look at it, but you also have to understand that not everybody understands what it takes to reach the pinnacle of what you do in the most perfect form possible. And so you can't blame them for not understanding, what you're doing. What you have to do is just say, okay, fine. You know what? I'm going to give the best of my ability to what I do and pray that all goes well. And that's what I did. Before every single competition, before every single approach to any sort of test, I always made sure that I left nothing behind, that I gave absolutely everything. And that assurance is what helped me and even protected me emotionally and psychologically into knowing that if I gave the best of my ability and made sure that I gave it all, then whatever happens is something that is out of our hands, because you can't assure a result. All you can assure is the process and the execution that you do in order to get there.
So if you're tuning in, we've got lots of people popping in here, and there's so many questions. We've got Courtney Harden popping in. How are you today? We've got Michael popping in. Good to see you. We've got another, and this shows LinkedIn user, so I think I know who this is, but hi, Amanda and Charles. Would love to talk to you about my site. So I'll get you connected there, Charles. Very excited this is what this is all about, is connection and amazing people connecting with other people. And I want to take it back a little bit. So I want to ask a couple of questions that are coming in because they're really insightful questions. So this one said, if you had to give advice to a young athlete, what advice would you give? And I want to preface this also by, I have a lot of college athletes that tune into this show. So maybe break it up in like really young athletes that are, just starting to maybe get into that high training aspect of maybe going to the next level, but also maybe college athletes, and what your thoughts are with that too.
That question to me is a very almost complicated question, just because I'm not going to tell you, oh, believe in your goals, believe in your dreams, and they're going to happen. No, I mean, there is a process to achieving your dreams. There is a process to achieving your goals. If you're very, very young and you enjoy what you're doing, then do it because you enjoy it and because you love it, not because you're being forced. But also at the same time, start to think of a purpose. Start to think of a reason why you do what you do. Is it for you? Is it for your future? Is it for your family? As a young college athlete, I would say, okay, how am I going to pay for college if I don't have scholarships? How am I going to afford going to a very prestigious school and maybe not having the means to do so? Well, maybe the purpose of you perfecting your sport is being admitted into this college and having full ride scholarships and enjoying the journey that it takes to get from being a young athlete to seeing the result of your hard work, seeing the result of what you're doing. Now, obviously, there are pros and cons to what you do. There's a massive balance into what you need to sacrifice in order to get to where you want to be. What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to give? And those are important questions that you have to be brutally honest with yourself, because I've seen people time and time again go after something with all they got, and sometimes it's just not enough. And when they reach high 20s, low 30s, and they don't make it, unfortunately, you have not time wasted if you're learning your lessons, if you're learning everything, and those things can be applied into future aspects of your life. But you also have to be brutally honest with yourself of the value of time that you're giving something. Just because you want to do something and you have a dream of doing so doesn't necessarily mean that you might make it. But what you learn along the way is going to help you apply those values and apply those concepts to other areas of life that you might not even know you're good at. And so it's not necessarily about, oh, I need to be successful when I'm very, very young. I mean, there's a lot of people who really didn't reach the pinnacle of their success till they were in their late 50s, in their late 60s.
And they failed a lot.
and they
failed a lot
And
throughout their journey. And this is something I'm so passionate about, is like, failure is totally just part of the process, period.
Absolutely.
Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. It's good learning lessons. It's good opportunities to learn and grow, but it's part of everybody's process.
Yeah. And I try to discuss, and I try to bring the concept of practicality to a process when somebody really wants to become a high professional athlete. At the end of the day, I mean, a lot of people say this, but at the end of the day, you know, they say it's about the journey, not about the end result. But, and that is very, very true. But if you can internalize the journey, if you can look back at what you did wrong, what you did right, regardless of the outcome, then your fulfillment is going to be greater than putting all your eggs in one basket and hoping that you're going to reach that Olympic gold medal, because, I mean, there's only going to be one winner, right? And so for me, it was always important to ensure that everything that I lived through the journey, all the opportunities that approached me, I took advantage of, because you never know what life is going to throw at you. And when you're prepared to respond to those failures, when you're prepared to respond to whatever happens that's unforeseen, it's easier for you to shift and to alternate perspectives in everything that you're doing. And that's what life is. I mean, life isn't fair. As unfortunate as it is to say that, it isn't. But it's those who have greater resiliency, it's those who live with a purpose greater than themselves, that are able to adjust to different circumstances and apply all those lessons learned in their whole journey and become great in whatever it is that they put their mind and soul to, if that's something that they, you know, that they want to go after. And so it's just that patience in that process that one needs to understand. Not everything happens overnight. One thing I always say is there's no shortcuts to achieve the impossible. That's something that I have always internalized. There is no shortcuts. And if you think there is, there isn't.
Well, and so you're on the totally opposite end of the spectrum here, because I see a lot of athletes that put their entire being of that of the sport. Like, everything about their identity is that of the sport. And you didn't do that. And so if you're talking to other athletes that are going through this process right now, like, what words of advice or encouragement would you give them to start thinking through what is life and purpose outside of this sport? Because I think it's a critical component that's been missing for a long time, right? Athletes are highly disciplined, highly focused, told to be very, very focused on whatever they're doing. And mostly that's that of the sport, right? But now there's a lot of conversation being had around mental wellness and transition, and how do we protect these athletes, not just while they're in the sport, but outside the sport. So, like, how would you go about, if you're talking to other athletes, knowing what you do know and how you thrived in that scenario? Like, what words of encouragement or advice would you give to them?
I would say that one thing I would tell them is they shouldn't chase a dream or goal at the expense of the end of yourself. Meaning, don't go after something if it's going to harm you, if it's going to make you lose yourself in the process, because you know who you are. You know what you represent. You know what purpose. You know what moves you. And sometimes people get lost in that journey. People get lost in trying to go after something that might be deteriorating them. You know, they might be deteriorating themselves, you know, from within. I think it's all about establishing a healthy balance and filling yourself with what means the most to you. And so I know this is a little complicated to understand, but that's pretty much what I did. And tried to realize you have to be brutally honest with yourself when you're entering these moments of high performance execution. I mean, I remember, honestly, there was a conversation with my dad where we went at it big time. And my end statement was, you know, I don't care how much I have to give to myself. I mean, if I die out there on the track, I die there out the track. I know that I gave it all. And that was a little bit of a cutthroat response to our conversation or our discussion that we had. But that was the first time when I was realizing, like, I didn't care about my own safety. I didn't care about my personal well-being, as long as I knew that I could reach the maximum levels of exertion at the risk of my own health.
But how did you get that back? Like, was it due to external factors? Was that internal mindset? Like, what happened that changed? Because I see this a lot in business leaders and entrepreneurs as well, where they're going down a path. And I've even been down this when I was in the corporate world.
Absolutely.
I was going down a path that I thought that this was the path that I needed to go down. And at all costs, I'm just going to do whatever I can to see success. But success is defined as a lot of different things for a lot of different people. Right. And if you don't set your own goals, and if you don't set your own intentions, and you don't set your own direction, then you end up on this path that's not necessarily designed for you. Right. And it may be unhealthy. It may be, like you said, deteriorating yourself. Like, so at what point were you like, I need to get this together? Because that's super critical for a lot of people. And some people may be on this path, not on their journey to Olympic medals, but on their journey to business success.
Success, in my opinion, is subjective to each person's own definition. I believe that success shouldn't be defined by anybody else but yourself. And that's being okay with your effort. That's being okay with what you're doing. But there's also non-negotiables that you should take into consideration. Those non-negotiables should be your personal health, your mental health. Those non-negotiables, in my opinion, should be your family, or your relationship with others. At what expense, or at what lengths are you willing to go to in order to sacrifice that? There is a balance. There is a give and take. And I believe that, like I said, and I said this over and over again, one needs to be brutally honest with themselves when it comes to what matters most in life. And if that's your family, if that's your relationship with the others around you, if that's even to a certain extent your pleasures in life, whether that be having the time to going out and walking your dogs, or taking vacations or stuff like that, then that should be the definition of success for you. And nobody else should be able to define that, because everybody's unique. Everybody's different. And so when you have somebody going down that path, especially for me, I'm reaching the end of myself for what? A potential gold medal? I mean, you have one day, you have one chance to reach a gold medal out of who knows how many hundreds of thousands of athletes that have tried to make it to where you are now. Are you going to destroy 4 years of work just because you got second place and you didn't get gold? Absolutely not. In my opinion, there are people that do that. But when it's all over, what do you have? If you really sacrificed your whole life to get to that point, then in my opinion, I'm sorry, you might not have anything to look forward to after that. And that's why it's important to embrace these opportunities, embrace conversations, embrace a healthy balance into who you're pouring in, what you're pouring in, and who's pouring into you. You can't do everything by yourself. I solely believe that. And it took me a while to understand, just because, in a world, in a third world country, especially when you're raising your own bar for yourself, nobody's ever experienced or lived what you've lived through except for whoever's with you in the present moment. So nobody knows what to expect. So as somebody who has needed to meet expectations, to execute, talk with their team, and even tread unknown territory when it comes to performance, it's important to set the standards. It's important to set, healthy measures when it comes to protecting yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, because there are a lot of unforeseen things that can happen, such as the Olympics being canceled one morning, and you in your mindset of,
I'm ready to go, and it's all like, you've got to flip that.
You have to flip it. It's a decision. And so there are a lot of ways that you can come about things, but I think that when one is honest with themselves, they will be able to understand what a healthy balance is into proper execution. And that says a lot more to your life than somebody who is chasing perfection and eventually reaches it, but then looks back and has nobody else around them. And I think that we can all come to the conclusion that the world nowadays has set such a high bar for what it means to be successful. But that definition was set by a worldly standard, not by one's own standard. And I think it's important that people begin to realize that, your definition of success or a happy life should be defined by you, not by an institution, not by somebody else. because you aren't them. Everybody's life is unique. Everybody's life has a different purpose. And I think it's important that one acknowledges that and takes action before they get to the end of themselves just because they wanted to prove something to somebody else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I want to dive into, and we've got a couple questions that we'll get to here in just a minute, but I want to keep the conversation flowing with you. So not only are you a two-time Olympic medalist, but you're also an economist, a nonprofit community advocate. I mean, you do so much servant leadership work, and you're a TEDx speaker, motivational speaker. So you are, and you've also been very open to learning and humbling yourself in situations where you're just open to explore, and you have this sense of curiosity to you. So how did you go about, while you were training, actually getting education as well, or going about starting to think through, what is my career going to be outside of sports? And how did you go about doing that?
Absolutely. So my purpose in sports was always to create a platform where I could be a difference in front of the people who followed me, in front of the people who's watched me. I've always tried to live a selfless life when it comes to using the resources and everything that I've had and everything that I've obtained. Because when I say it's not necessarily because I did it, but because there were other people around me and even my own faith that empowered me to be where I was in that moment, never expecting any of this to happen. And so with that being said, if my purpose has always been to empower others, if my purpose and my platform has always been to bring a greater light to those who have spoken with me, to those who have looked to me, then it's also my duty to live out what I'm saying. I can't just say, oh, I'm doing this and this and this and this and this, or I want to do this, but all I'm doing is being an Olympic athlete. Yes, I mean, there comes a time where you have to solely focus on being an Olympic athlete because there's no other option. But there comes a time where, you have to lean in to other opportunities. I mean, one of the biggest opportunities that I ever took, and I had no hesitance to take it was the TEDx invitation. When I was invited to do my TED talk, I didn't know what to expect. All I knew is that this was going to take time. It was going to take energy. It was going to take effort, even away from my performance as an athlete. But with that being said, there are also opportunities that will present itself in front of you that sometimes you just got to take, just because you're going to expand your knowledge. You're going to expand your capabilities. That you're going to expand your own self in whatever you dedicate yourself to. And so TEDx was just one of those opportunities. But also I was involved in two boards when it came to representing Olympic athletes and athletes all around the world, nationally and internationally. That was a job that also took away a little bit my attention from sports as well. But these were all opportunities that I knew that were going to fulfill the greater purpose of not just being an Olympic athlete, but being somebody of reference, somebody who I could share my dreams, my goals, my intentions, my trajectory with, and hoping that they also do the same. But not just in sports, in all areas of life, in business, in music, in art, in entrepreneurship, all those things. All what I'm saying is all applicable in all those areas of life. And it's never too late in order to embark that journey. But there are processes that need to be respected. There are also other opportunities that there, like I said, there's processes to be respected. And with that process comes a lot of patience, a lot of dedication. And so even for me now, it's, what is my life going to look like? Should I go for a third Olympics? Should I use the youthful energy that I have in order to go to my third Olympics? Or do I use that energy to embark on a different journey that might not be an Olympics, but might be just as intense as achieving the Olympic Games? Does that make sense? And so there is an importance to understanding that that there's a balance to everything. There's a time for everything. And it's important to realize that.
So Jason's chiming in here, and this is a great question from what you just said. And he asked, do you consider yourself a role model? Why or why not?
I consider myself somebody who tries to empower others. Is that a role model? Maybe. Is it not? Maybe. But at the end of the day, for me, it's always about pushing others to reach the best of their potential, to reach the best of their capabilities. I would believe that my life has been somewhat of a role model to others. But at the end of the day, that my image to others should never be limited to what they can achieve, even greater than what I've ever done. Does that make sense? And I think that's important when you're talking about servant leadership. Servant leadership is the process of empowering those around you through selfless actions of service. I think a word that not many people realize that attaches to servant leadership is altruism. It's when we act to promote somebody else's welfare, even at the risk or expense of our own success. And I think for me, that's always been an attitude that I've had when it comes to talking to people, when it comes to encouraging others, letting others know that even though they've looked up to me, they can be greater than I am. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
And if I can have the opportunity to push them towards that, then I'm going to do that, because at the end of the day, it's just not about, what I achieve, what I've done, but about what legacy you've left to the people behind you, to the people who are looking at you. That's how you create a bigger difference in the world around you. I've always said this: you don't change the world, with everybody around you at once. You change the world one individual world at a time. And that speaks a lot to when it comes to how we should approach looking at others, especially nowadays. It is not necessarily looking down on people and saying, oh yeah, you can do it, this and this and this and this, and being selfish to one's own accolades, one's own accomplishments, but saying, no, you can do this, even be better. And so I've always tried to live my life that way. And if there's somebody that can take my story, take whatever I've done in my personal life, ask for my help, and use that as a catapult to being better, and having 10 times more impact. And for me, that's suffice. And that's what my whole trajectory has been about. But I can't speak of that unless I do it. Does that make sense? So
absolutely. No, I'm the same way too. So let's take a moment real quick, and I want you to come up with a phrase too, because this is the phrase that I tell other people. I did a TEDx, and I want to talk to you about your TEDx on this one, but I want to plant the seed with other people. So you need to come up with a phrase as well. But for anybody that's tuning in, I want you to pick up 2 people, reach out to them. If you see a gift in them, say, I believe in you. That has catapulted me in a lot of different capacities, not just sports, but also in business, because people have planted the seed and belief in me. This is what my TEDx was about. So if you were telling somebody a small phrase that they could share with maybe somebody that they see a gift in, what would that phrase be?
A small phrase to tell somebody to see a gift in. So you had one prepared. I didn't.
Yeah, sorry. We could move on, and we could maybe come back at that. But I mean, it's something like, I think people think of like, I want to make an impact on a global basis. I want this huge impact. But you just said it. It's one person at a time.
Mm-hmm. I would say never underestimate the impact that you have to the people who are looking around you. I think a lot of people associate leadership with power. They associate leadership with positions of notoriety, of responsibility. But leadership, in my opinion, like I said, isn't about where you're at on the ladder. Leadership is about the amount of impact that you have to the people around you. Like I said, it's all about empowering those around you. And so even though you might not be the boss of this mega financial firm, maybe you not be the boss of your own company, but you might have the impact to the people who are living day to day, with you. And you have that power to change people. You have that power to influence others for good. And a lot of people underestimate the power that they have within themselves to do something good, and to cause an impact into others. And like you said, it's that seed that someone planted in you that helped you catapult into where you are today. it speaks a lot for somebody to say, I believe in you. And especially when it comes from somebody that has lived through whatever you want to achieve, has lived through everything that you've ever wanted to go after. And for me, when I tell somebody I believe in them, it's because I believe in them. It's because I went through whatever I had to go to get to where I'm at now. And I see that same exact passion. I see that same exact fire within them. But it's in everybody's own hands to act upon that and be responsible for what they do with that. But don't ever underestimate it. Don't ever underestimate the power of impact and influence that you have with people around you, because you can change one life, and that one life can change hundreds of thousands of other lives. And sometimes you might see it and sometimes you don't. But I guess that's the beauty of life, knowing that you did everything possible in order to change the world in a positive way, by just encouraging others around you. And people are looking at you. I don't think people also realize that there's always going to be eyes on you. So it's important, if you want to live a fruitful life, to live a life that is meaningful to others, even though you might not know what unspoken seed you planted in their hearts or their minds, right?
Well, and let's talk about this, because there's a lot of people that approach me that ask me about TEDx now, because I've done one and I had experience with that, and you shared experience in that. I want to talk a little bit about your journey there, as well as I'm going to drop a link to your TEDx if you can share it with me, or you can drop that link or whatever. We'll make sure that the audience has it. But that was a difficult process for me. Did you find that to be a challenging process? Like, people think, oh my gosh, it's just 18 minutes, not a big deal. Like, it is so tough. Like, so you were training for the Olympics, right? But you were also preparing for a TEDx. So tell me a little bit about your journey, because it's such a challenging thing to experience. It really, truly is, in my opinion. Maybe not yours, but it was hard. Did you find it to be hard?
Oh my word. I did not know what I was signing up for. I mean, I knew it was going to be hard, but I did not think it was going to be as hard as it was. And so obviously TEDx messaged me on Instagram and said, we would love for you to do, give us a topic, give us a speech, give us a talk. And I was
What was your topic?
My topic was the importance of micro decisions in execution, long-term, short-term, but also the art of failing. And so I really focused on what it means to take these very, very little decisions in your everyday going, and what those decisions and what impact it has on long-term basis. Every little thing affects the future. And if you're not aware of it, if you're not conscious about every single thing that you do in the process of your job, in the process of studying, in the process of your daily habits, and you reach a goal, you reach a final destination, whether that be good or bad, and you don't know what happens, it's because you weren't thinking about those little things that led up to it. And that's super, super important. Like I said, in that process of not doing it once, but doing it twice and doing it over and over again. And so in the process of doing that TEDx, I was just like, oh, this is so cool. TEDx reached out to me. This is a dream come true. But then I stopped. I said, wait, what will this take away from my execution of being an athlete? Because when you're in that mindset, you should have nothing that's distracting you when it comes to preparing for an Olympic Games. And so I thought about it and I said, you know what? This is an opportunity that's never going to come again. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to lean into it, and whatever happens, happens. But I'm just going to have to do it. And one thing about me is when I want to do something, I make sure that I do it to the best of my ability. And so for me, I knew it was going to take a little bit away from me, but I said, no, this is worth it. But yeah, I mean, long story short, obviously, the patterns of execution, the patterns of your speech, the levels and different ups and downs that your talk needs to have when it comes to engaging with people. I think one of the hardest things that you can attest to is the fact that over and over again, they would tell me, they said, Charles, your speech or your talk isn't a motivational talk. And if there's anything within your talk that's motivational, we're going to scratch it and you got to redo it again. And so obviously my whole life has been, oh yeah, I've been to the Olympics. I've done this and this and this and this. But obviously the slogan and the mission of TEDx is ideas worth sharing. And so obviously it was very, very difficult to learn that process. But towards the end of it, long story short, I just remember I was I mean, I would not let myself go to bed, even though I had to wake up at 3:30 in the morning, unless I recited my TEDx 3 times perfectly. This was like 2 weeks before I actually had to do it. 3 times perfectly. Then I was able to go to bed. And I was very strict in that. I wouldn't get out of the shower unless I recited it at least once perfectly. On my way to training, was I reciting it? And so it was just this constant preoccupation of this TEDx for about 3 weeks in my life, where it was just reciting.
It's intense.
It's intense. And I kid you not, once I was done with it, I was just like, I'm going to take a break. This is not happening again anytime soon. I mean, I was relieved. I mean, I definitely took a look at that accomplishment as a goal, as a result that I've achieved in my life. And I put a lot of importance to it, not because of what it was, but because of what I went through in order to achieve it. And I'm super grateful for it. And, you know, I don't know where that TEDx talk can lead me to, but it's led me to know and understand that I am capable of doing this. All I have to do is just get out of my comfort zone and say, let's do it.
It is super uncomfortable. Like, I don't know about you, but I was pretty uncomfortable through the whole process, right? Because it's not something, unless you're like a very seasoned speaker,
yes.
right? It's not something that is just like a natural kind of thing. And I mean, it's a lot of repetition, a lot of practice. And,
absolutely.
You know, it's such a blessing, right? It's a great learning opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
It's humbling. It's a good experience. And so we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to ask one more question that came in. Because I think that this is critical. So Jason also asked, what is one impactful moment that helped shape the person who you are today?
One impactful moment that has shaped me into who I am today. I remember, I mean, this is just one of many, but I remember there was one time where I was swimming in the pool, and I remember we were training very, very hard. It was the end of a massive training period before going to the Rio Olympic Games. And when we were supposed to be tapering, our coach was just drilling us time and time again with sets that did not make sense in my head. I was just like, we're supposed to be tapering down into this competition, and you're killing us. And there was one session and there was one set that he put upon us where I just started bawling. I mean, I could not handle it. And he asked for times that I never had ever reached in my life when it comes to the way he wanted us to do it. But I just remember standing there in tears, in the water, thinking about how in the world am I going to do this? And when you take a look at everything that you've done in your life, and you take a look at the past, sometimes our own selves limit us into entering something new, something different, something that we never thought we could have ever achieved. I mean, I just prayed right before setting off, and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to give it all. I'm not going to leave everything behind. And if I die in this pool, I die in this pool. But I'm going to die trying. And I mean, sometimes you gotta have that mentality. And I hit all those times and even better. And at the end of the practice, I looked back, and I looked at the capability that I have if I embrace the challenges, if I embrace everything that I'm living in that present moment and apply that to other areas of life. I think we underestimate the amount of power that we have within ourselves in order to achieve great things. And those great things are things that could be a challenge that we never thought we could overcome. And sometimes just because we think we cannot overcome it based on past experiences, based on past things, we don't try. But it isn't until we try do we realize that we are actually good at it and we're even better than we thought. And I think that for me in my personal life, and especially now, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with my life. I don't know, I don't know what the future holds for me.
You're in the transition phase right now, my friend, of figuring out, like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go train? Am I going to go to business? Like, what am I going to do both at the same time? Like, what does this look like? But the thing that I'm so just in awe with you about is you're just so open-minded to opportunity, and you're not closed off. Like, there are so many people, and I talk about this in the podcast recording I just did, that will say no without even processing it. Like, they're so quick to say no, but yet that yes could absolutely change their trajectory or their life, but they don't give any consideration. They just say no, whether it's fear, whether it's bias, whatever it may be. They just say no. So do you, like, this whole conversation is like, I mean, you're open and curious, and like you're not closed off. Like, you're open to
and
the yeses.
And that's to everything. That's to everybody. We never know what a simple conversation of listening to somebody will bring to you. I think that's a massive attribute to servant leadership. When you're talking about servant leadership, you're opening to listening to other people. You're opening yourself to different opportunities, to an open mindset when it comes to, okay, what can I learn from this? I mean, it doesn't hurt to try. So why not do it anyways? It doesn't hurt to listen to this person. Why not do it anyways? Because you never know where that can lead you. I mean, that is a like you said, the open-mindedness of being open to experiences, being open to different conversations, different approaches with an open heart and open mind opens doors more than you could ever imagine. I think a lot of people nowadays are so closed off to what they know, what they're comfortable with, without going out of their comfort zone and exploring other things, but not other things in a way that, okay, I'll do this, but only if this is a certain way, or this person believes in what I believe in. No, I mean, there should always be an open-mindedness to always learning from something from somebody, or learning something from an experience. And the more you open yourself up to those experiences, the more knowledge you're going to have, and the more references you're going to have in order to apply that to future circumstances. And so for me, just these lessons that I've learned in my whole life as an athlete has now translated into understanding what it means to lead a proper business, what it means to be a proper leader, like I said, that empowers others through altruism at the expense of your own self. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, for me, a life worth living is a life that leaves a legacy, that leaves hope, that leaves grace to other people around me in order for them to do the same, if not even better. And so if I can continue my life like that, not knowing what I'm going to do tomorrow, then I'm happy, because I'm living a life that is successful to my own standards, not successful to the standards of any investment bank, or not to the successful standards of anybody who has money, right? All that's subjective, all that's relative. I think everybody should come to their own conclusion of what it means to be a successful individual, with or without resources.
Well, I am totally cheering you on. Whatever you decide to do, I am so cheering you on. And I know that other people listening into this conversation are, I mean, super fans. I mean, you've dropped so many incredible leadership nuggets and background. I mean, so much helpful information. I could literally talk to you all day. But I want people to, so first and foremost, if you're not connected to Charles, definitely go connect with him on LinkedIn. That's how we got connected, on LinkedIn. So definitely go connect with him. But how can people continue to follow your journey?
Absolutely. So
phone numbers.
Absolutely. So little by little, I am in this transition period where my life, I guess, has not taken off yet. And when I say yes, I've done a lot of things in my past life, but I'm going to be very honest with you. I do not think that was it. I do believe there's so much more to give. There's so much more to do, and I'm just starting. What happened in the past is just a little taste of what's to come. And when that happens, I do believe that, Lord willing, I will have the platform, I will have the access, I will have the information necessary in order to create something where people can connect to, where people can use the information and use each other to expand their knowledge, to expand their abilities, to expand their capabilities into greater things that they never thought they could ever achieve. And so, with all this being said, yeah, follow me on my LinkedIn. There's not much there. Except for who I am.
And I'm going to connect you to a couple of people. There's already a couple of people that have reached out to me and been like, hey, can you connect me with Charles? Yes, I will be happy to do so. But, is there, so aside from LinkedIn, are you on Twitter?
Here's my Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram. I'm very personal on Instagram. I try to be as real as possible. My Instagram is Charles Fernandez _5. You can follow me there, just a little bit on my personal life and my outlook on how I take a look at things. But like I said, little by little, when the time comes where I'll be able to really kickstart my journey into a more practical way for other people to follow and people to take a look at, and also people to connect with, will you start being able to see a little bit of what that looks like in my personal life. But until now, I'm more than happy to have open conversations. I'm more than happy to look at different opportunities, obviously based upon availability and everything that I personally go through in this season. But yeah, I would just say never stop exploring, never stop connecting with people, because you never know where that can lead you. Always take those opportunities, always knock on those doors, because you never know when the right one will open, and that will lead you into an endless amount of opportunities that you never knew that you could ever imagine. I think it's just leaning into that and embracing that uncertainty, because that's where I'm at now, just an uncertainty phase. But I know who I am, I know what I represent, and I know that whatever it is to come next, I'm going to give it all that I have in order to be the best that I can be for the people around me.
Well, Charles, thank you so much for joining in on conversation today. This was, inspirational, motivational, educational, all the things. So thank you so much for joining. To everybody that is listening in, thank you for constantly listening in and joining us in these conversations. Every week I learn something from these amazing people, and I hope you do as well. And until next week, have a great rest of your week, and please reach out if we can be of assistance in any way. See you soon.
Thank you, guys.